My parents mocked my career path until I became a millionaire. Now they want me at family dinners, but I only RSVP with silence. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I've always been the disappointment in my family's eyes. Growing up, my house was full of trophies, certificates, and framed diplomas from my siblings, the older ones, the golden children. My dad, a lawyer, and my mom, a high school teacher, loved to remind me, usually in passing, that success requires discipline and focus. Meanwhile, I spent hours tinkering with computers, teaching myself coding, experimenting with online stores, and dreaming up businesses nobody in my family thought were real careers. Every time I brought up an idea, I got the same responses. "You're lazy," my dad would say, slamming his hands on the dinner table. "This is delusional. Why don't you get a real job?" My older sister, now a pediatrician, once laughed when I showed her a mock-up of a website I'd built. "Cute. Are you going to sell cookies through it or something?" Even my mom, who tried to soften the blows, would sigh and mutter, "We just want what's best for you. Don't waste your life." Their words didn't just sting. They became a script I unconsciously followed, a reminder that my dreams were always wrong. I remember lying awake some nights in my small, cluttered room, the hum of my laptop the only company as I coded and planned. The walls were lined with schoolbooks I barely touched, reminders that my family's definition of achievement didn't include me. I'd hear the laughter from the living room, my siblings talking about medical school, law exams, grades I'd never care about, and I felt invisible, like my passions didn't even exist in their reality. And yet, somewhere deep down, I refused to stop. I refused to be just the lazy one, or the dreamer. Even when my mom cornered me in the kitchen one evening and said, "You're wasting your life, just take a normal path." I didn't argue, I just nodded and went back to my laptop, because I knew they couldn't see what I could. But I didn't know how long I could keep pretending my dreams mattered to no one. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. Someday, I wouldn't need their approval, but I had no idea how high the walls I'd have to climb really were. It happened at a family dinner when I was 22, the kind where everyone tries to show off while pretending they care about each other. I had just landed my first freelance client, a small tech startup paying me enough to cover my rent for the next 3 months, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could share it with them. So, in the middle of the dinner, I cleared my throat. I just signed a contract with a startup. They're paying me to manage their website and online marketing. Silence fell. My dad smirked, pushing his plate away. "So, you're playing on your laptop for money now? Really?" His tone wasn't teasing. It was scornful, like I'd committed a crime against the family's legacy. My sister chuckled from across the table. "Cute. Are you going to call yourself an entrepreneur now?" My mom quickly jumped in, glancing at him. "Honey, maybe he's trying. Give him a chance." But even she sounded unsure, like she wasn't fully convinced it was worth taking seriously. I felt my stomach twist. The smell of my dad's cologne mixed with the aroma of roast chicken, but I couldn't taste a bite. My words, my excitement, everything I'd worked for felt like it had vanished. I tried to explain the project, the website traffic, the growth plan, but each word seemed to bounce off invisible walls. They weren't listening. They weren't proud. They weren't even curious. Later, I walked to my room, the carpet rough under my bare feet, and slammed the door behind me. I sat on my bed, staring at my laptop, heart heavy. Why am I even trying? I whispered to myself. Every small victory felt meaningless in a house that didn't believe I could succeed. That night I cried quietly, not from failure, but from the realization that nothing I did would ever be enough for them. And yet, as I wiped my eyes and powered on my laptop, a stubborn thought lingered. They don't have to see it. They don't get to define what I can or can't do. I promised myself then. I would work in silence, build without applause, and one day I'd show them in a way they couldn't ignore. But I had no idea how long that road would be or how lonely it could feel. From that night on, I stopped talking about my work at home. Every idea, every small win, every failure, I kept it to myself. I immersed myself in coding tutorials, digital marketing forums, and late-night webinars, often working until 3 a.m., my apartment dimly lit except for the glow of the laptop screen. The hum of the fan, the faint smell of instant coffee, and the click of the keyboard became my only companions. I didn't need anyone cheering me on. I needed focus, discipline, and proof that I could actually build something. My first few attempts at online businesses flopped spectacularly. I spent months creating an e-commerce store, thinking I'd hit the perfect niche, but the traffic was non-existent, the products didn't sell, and the money I invested vanished in a blur. When I vented to a friend over the phone, they laughed and said, "You've got guts, man, but maybe your family has a point." Their words stung, but not as much as the thought of my family mocking me if they ever found out. I remember one evening sitting on the couch in my tiny living room, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and spreadsheets, and my mom's voice echoing in my head. "Maybe this is God's way of telling you to stop chasing silly things." I clenched my fists, teeth gritted. No, this wasn't silly. This was everything I wanted. I promised myself I wouldn't give up, even if it meant facing humiliation, exhaustion, and isolation alone. And yet, the loneliness was suffocating. Every success felt hollow without someone to share it with. Every failure felt like a confirmation that I was destined to be the lazy dreamer. But I refused to quit. I whispered to myself in the dark, "One day, they'll see." I didn't know when or how, but I knew I couldn't let their doubt define me. The night stretched on, and I stared at my spreadsheet, blinking at numbers that barely made sense yet held the seeds of possibility. Somewhere deep inside, a stubborn fire burned. I was determined to prove, even if only to myself, that I could turn silence into success. And I had no idea just how high the stakes would get before anyone would notice. Months later, my second attempt at an online store started showing signs of life. Traffic was slowly picking up, a few sales trickled in, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. I wanted to tell my family. I wanted them to finally see that maybe I wasn't just wasting my time. One evening, I brought it up at dinner, heart pounding, hands shaking slightly as I set down my plate. "I think my store's starting to make some real money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My dad snorted, cutting his steak with exaggerated force. "Talk to me when you're earning like a man." The words hit like a punch to the chest. My sister laughed loudly, drawing attention to herself as if it was a performance. "So, you're an Instagram influencer now?" she said, smirking. Even my mom, who usually tried to mediate, gave me a sad look. "Maybe in time, honey, but don't get your hopes up." The room smelled of roasted vegetables and perfume, but I couldn't taste a bite. Every ounce of pride I had felt evaporated instantly. I left the table and went straight to my room, slamming the door. The faint hum of my computer greeted me like an old friend. I stared at the dashboard, sales notifications, website analytics, small victories, and yet they didn't matter. They wouldn't matter. Nothing I achieved seemed real to the people who were supposed to care most. Anger, disappointment, and sorrow collided inside me, making it hard to breathe. That night, I decided to stop sharing anything. No more updates, no more attempts to explain, no more begging for validation. I would build, grind, and grow in silence. I whispered to myself as I worked late into the night, fingers flying across the keyboard, "One day, they'll see. They'll have to see." But even as I said it, a nagging doubt crept in. How long could I keep fighting in a world where the people I loved most refused to believe in me? And yet, somewhere beneath the frustration, a stubborn spark burned brighter. I didn't know it yet, but the first real step toward turning everything around had already begun. And it would change everything. Everything changed the day I got an unexpected email from a startup I'd never thought would notice me. They wanted to acquire one of my small digital projects, an offer I never imagined possible. I sat on my bed, staring at the screen, hands trembling. 6 figures. Just like that, a dream I'd been quietly chasing in the shadows was suddenly real money, real recognition, and for the first time, real validation. But it wasn't for them to see. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my siblings. I just signed the deal, negotiated carefully, and reinvested most of it into a new business model I'd been sketching out for months. Within weeks, my income tripled. I moved into a small but modern apartment, furnished it with things I'd never dared to dream of owning, and for the first time, I felt the taste of freedom. My family still assumed I was scraping by, struggling like they always thought I would. Every group chat message, every passing comment about my supposed failure felt like fuel. The twist hit hard when I received a congratulatory email from a mentor I'd met online months before. He wrote, "Your dedication is rare. Keep building quietly. Success doesn't need permission." And suddenly, it all clicked. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their understanding. I just needed my own grit, patience, and the stubborn belief that I could make this work, even in the face of constant ridicule. That night, I sat in my apartment, the hum of my laptop the only sound, and stared at the city lights through my window. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. The isolation, the mockery, the endless skepticism, all of it had built something stronger in me. But with opportunity came a new fear. Now that I was succeeding, would they try to reclaim me, expecting a piece of something they never supported? I leaned back, breathing in the faint smell of coffee and new leather in my apartment, and smiled grimly. I didn't know it yet, but their disbelief was about to collide with my reality, and I had no intention of apologizing for it. A few months later, my family had a big wedding to attend. My cousin's. I decided to go, partly out of habit, partly to keep up appearances, though I had no intention of sharing anything about my life. Walking into the banquet hall, the smell of fried appetizers and perfume hit me, a sensory overload of familiarity and discomfort. The room buzzed with laughter, chatter about promotions, raises, and college achievements. I felt invisible, exactly like I had for years. Even though my bank account now screamed otherwise, my parents proudly boasted about my siblings, recounting every award, every recognition, every step up the ladder. When someone asked about me, my mother hesitated, a forced smile on her face. "Oh, he's figuring things out. He's doing something online, I think." My dad barely nodded, more interested in holding his champagne than acknowledging me. I caught my sister's eye as she whispered to a friend, "He's always been so stubborn. Maybe that's why nothing ever worked for him." I felt a pang in my chest, a cocktail of anger and disbelief. I excused myself, stepping out into the warm evening air. The faint hum of the city beyond the hall was a welcome relief compared to the stifling pretension inside. My thoughts swirled. They still saw me as small, insignificant, a curiosity at best. And yet, inside I was thriving, growing in ways they couldn't even imagine. I realized they didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to keep me in the shadow they'd always cast. I walked a few blocks, breathing in the cold night air, the neon streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier rain. I imagined my bank account, my projects, the tiny empire I was quietly building, and felt a surge of satisfaction. No one in that hall could diminish my accomplishments, and a strange sense of power settled in me. They thought they were the gatekeepers of my life, but they didn't even have the keys. Still, as I stared at the glowing windows of the hall, a quiet question lingered in my mind. How would they react when they finally realized I didn't need them at all? That thought alone made me smirk, and yet, deep down, I knew a reckoning was coming. It all came crashing down one evening, unannounced, like a storm I hadn't seen coming. I was back at my parents' house for a rare visit, trying to maintain civility, when my dad finally snapped. "You'll always be the joke of this family," he said, voice sharp, eyes blazing. "No matter how much you pretend you're successful, you'll never be one of us." The words pierced deeper than any critique before. They weren't about my work, my dreams, or even my failures. They were about me, the essence of who I was, and for the first time, I felt completely defeated. I tried to respond, my voice shaking. "I've worked harder than any of you could imagine." But he cut me off. "Stop making excuses. You'll never amount to anything real." My mother, who usually tried to soften the blows, just sat there quietly, staring at her hands. My siblings exchanged uneasy glances as if they wanted to defend me but didn't dare. The room smelled of stale dinner and lingering tension, suffocating me. I left the house mid-conversation, heart pounding, fists clenched. I walked the dark streets outside, the cool air doing little to calm the fire of despair in my chest. Every failure, every moment of mockery, every night I had cried alone, it all came flooding back. For the first time in years, I questioned myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was chasing a fantasy that would never be validated. I spent the next few weeks avoiding calls, ignoring messages, even staying away from my own apartment sometimes, wandering the city streets in a daze. Nights were the hardest, the hum of streetlights, distant car horns, the smell of rain on asphalt, all reminders that I was alone in this fight. It was the lowest I'd ever felt, a moment where giving up seemed like the only relief. But even in that dark abyss, a stubborn thought clung to me. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. I couldn't let their judgment define the rest of my life. I just didn't know yet how I'd rise from it, or when the reckoning would finally begin. After weeks of wandering in a fog of despair, I started picking up the pieces, slowly, deliberately. Therapy helped me untangle the weight of years spent seeking validation from people who never believed in me. I reconnected with friends who had always supported me quietly, mentors I met online, and even strangers whose encouragement felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. I began to focus on impact rather than recognition, building projects that mattered to me, mentoring younger entrepreneurs, and surrounding myself with people who actually celebrated effort and growth. I hired a small team, poured myself into new business ideas, and watched as my income steadily crossed 7 figures. I upgraded my apartment, bought a car I'd only dreamed of, and traveled for work and leisure, experiencing freedom I'd never imagined. For the first time, I wasn't looking for approval, not even from the people who raised me. The smell of fresh coffee in my kitchen, the quiet hum of my computer, the warm sunlight streaming through my windows. All these small, ordinary things became symbols of my independence and power. I started sharing successes selectively, with friends, colleagues, and my growing community online, but never with my family. Every achievement felt sweeter because I knew it wasn't for them. It was proof that I could succeed entirely on my own terms. Even small wins, a client's praise, a successful product launch, felt like victories not just in business, but in life. The quiet satisfaction of building something they never thought I could was intoxicating. I realized I didn't need their approval to feel proud. The anger and pain that had driven me were now transformed into determination, clarity, and resilience. Every day I woke up, I reminded myself, they will never define me again. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered, if they ever found out how much I'd accomplished, how would they react? That thought lingered like a distant storm on the horizon, a question I wasn't ready to answer. It started innocuously enough, a notification on Facebook. My sister had tagged me in a post. Proud of my brother for being featured in this magazine. I clicked the link, heart racing, and saw my face staring back at me with a headline proclaiming my small digital business as one of the fastest growing startups under 30. I felt a rush of vindication, but also a strange twinge of anxiety. My parents still thought I was scraping by. Almost immediately, the family group chat exploded. My mom sent multiple messages, each more desperate than the last. Why didn't you tell us? We're so proud. My dad, less verbose but equally eager to claim the moment, sent a thumbs-up emoji. My sister tried to take credit in a subtle way, writing, "We always knew he had potential." I read every word, my chest tight, a mix of satisfaction and irritation flooding through me. They wanted to claim the glory without having supported me in the first place. I stared at the screen, the smell of my apartment's old carpet mixing with the faint aroma of leftover coffee, and realized something. I didn't have to respond. I didn't owe them a single explanation or acknowledgement. Every year of ridicule, every mocking comment, every dinner where my achievements were ignored, they all came rushing back. And yet, for the first time, I felt in control. I could choose how, or if, they would participate in my life. So I did nothing. I left the messages on seen and closed the app. I walked over to my window and stared at the city lights, feeling a strange calm settle in. I had built all of this quietly, without their approval, without their interference, and that made it mine entirely. But as I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the thought lingering at the back of my mind. Now that they knew, would they try to pull me back in, expecting a piece of what they never helped create? That question hung in the air like smoke, sharp and unrelenting. A few weeks after the Facebook post, my cousin called. "Hey, the family's having a dinner next weekend. Everyone's asking about you. You coming?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The very people who mocked me for years now wanted me at their table, basking in the warmth of the same family I'd once begged to see me succeed. I could feel the temptation, the desire to show up, to assert my presence, to finally make them acknowledge me. I sat on my couch, the faint smell of coffee lingering, the hum of my laptop in the background, and thought about all those years. The endless nights I spent coding while they watched TV, the birthdays I'd quietly celebrated alone, the dinners where my achievements were laughed off as insignificant. They didn't want me. They wanted the version of me they could boast about. I could see it clearly now. Their invitation wasn't love, it was opportunism. I typed a response carefully, deliberately. "I wish you all the best. Take care, no excuses, no explanations, no apologies. Just silence that spoke louder than any argument could." The cursor blinked back at me, steady and unyielding. Sending it, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced before. For once, I was in control. Not reacting, not defending, just choosing for myself. That night, I imagined the dinner without me. My parents probably fussing over the seating, trying to insert my name into conversations, while I smiled quietly in my own apartment. I pictured the smug pride they'd feel at claiming some ownership of my success. But I didn't care. I was free. I didn't owe them validation. Still, as I closed my laptop and sipped my coffee, a subtle tension lingered. How long before they tried another tactic? Another way to pull me back? To remind me that despite everything, they still thought they could define me? The question hovered like a shadow, a promise that the reckoning wasn't quite over. A few weeks after ignoring the dinner invitation, my dad called me. Finally, or so it seemed. But it wasn't a call about reconnecting. It was about the family house, which needed repairs, and his subtle but unmistakable tone made it clear, "You're successful now. You should contribute." My chest tightened. This wasn't concern. This wasn't an olive branch. It was leverage. A way to pull me back into the orbit I had spent years escaping. I listened as he laid out the offer, painting it as responsibility, as duty. My mom chimed in occasionally, her voice shaky, trying to make it sound like concern, but I could hear the underlying guilt trips threaded through every word. The weight of years of mockery, of belittling, of being told I'd never succeed. It all surged back at once. They weren't asking, they were expecting, and the expectation felt like a trap. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint aroma of my apartment's coffee and the subtle leather of my chair beneath me, and finally spoke, calmly, clearly. "You never believed in my future. Don't expect to benefit from it now." My words hung in the air like smoke, leaving no room for negotiation. I deleted his number after the call, feeling a mix of relief and vindication wash over me. That night, I walked through my apartment, the city lights glowing through the window, and finally allowed myself to exhale. The fear, the tension, the unrelenting pressure to prove myself, it began to dissolve. I realized I was free, truly free, not because of my money or success, but because I refused to be controlled by those who never supported me. Even as I lay in bed, the hum of the city outside, a quiet satisfaction settled in. They had tried to reclaim me, tried to use my accomplishments against me, but I had already stepped beyond their reach. The reckoning wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive. It was simply me, standing firm, unbending, untouchable. And I knew, in that moment, that I would never be manipulated again. I RSVP with silence, not out of anger, not out of spite, simply because I've built a life where I no longer need their approval. I don't show up to their dinners. I don't respond to their messages. I don't even think about explaining myself anymore. My presence, my success, my happiness, they exist on my own terms, far from the judgment and mockery that haunted me for years. I spend holidays with the people who've always mattered, friends who supported my dreams, mentors who believed in me, and colleagues who celebrated my wins without hesitation. Their laughter, their encouragement, the genuine pride in their eyes. It's everything I never got from my family. And the contrast is sharp, almost ironic. The very people who doubted me, ignored me, and belittled my every step now. Wonder why I'm absent, why my life doesn't revolve around their approval. Sometimes I think about them, their texts, their desperate attempts to claim my success, and I feel nothing but calm. The power isn't in proving anything to them. It's in knowing I don't need to. I walk through my apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows, smell of fresh coffee filling the room, and I feel a quiet joy that no insult or threat could ever touch. I am the architect of my own life. And yet there's a satisfaction I can't fully describe. Every time I remember their disbelief, every mocking word, every dinner where I was invisible, it all fueled this life I've built. Not revenge in the traditional sense, not vindication shouted across a room, but a life so full, so free, so undeniably mine that their attempts to define me now feel like whispers against a hurricane. I sit back, the city lights twinkling outside, and smile. I don't need them. I don't want them. I RSVP with silence, and in that quiet, I finally feel at peace. The black sheep is no longer invisible. The dreamer has become untouchable, and for the first time, I know I am completely, wholly free.